Obviously, you talked about budgets in the remarks. The last 2 decades of budgets were Republican budgets. So it sounds like you're indicting previous generations of the party for overspending and not setting parameters.
Look, I think that the first line is we can't ignore our own failings, right? So what I was saying is that we haven't allowed our reserves to keep up with our growth in our budget, and that's something that we should make a priority. So I was specifically pointing out something that we as a caucus can do better.
Brett, you mentioned climate change in your speech here. Would you like to support some type of bill that Florida's kind of behind a lot of other states in trying to move the ball forward on that issue?
Look, I think most people would say that over the last 5 years that I've been here in the legislature under the leadership of Speaker Corcoran and Speaker Oliva, we've done a great deal in water policy, whether it's in the reservoir in the Everglades or the $635+ million last year in the budget for water. So I think we're making those efforts. My point was to make sure that we don't get caught up in nonsense and we focus on real solutions that Floridians want.
What about your proposal for the inspectors general and what you mean by strengthening? What specifics do you have in mind?
I think the inspector general needs to have some teeth so that they can go and investigate these organizations. If you all recall, and really it was the reporters who brought it up first, right? In the CareerSource example that I used, it was brought to us by the press. It wasn't something that government initiated. It wasn't initiated by a state attorney or the attorney general's office. So my point there is that we need more teeth so that when there's instances like this, they can go in, they can investigate, they can recover misspent money, and then if it's really, really bad, they need to go forward with criminal prosecution.
Aren't things like the budget you talked about, it's a pretty thick-based budget. There's stuff that gets funded year after year. There's sort of a process that has led to the growth of the state budget. Do you have any sort of defined paths forward as far as how you would want to change the budget process, approach it differently to accomplish some of the goals you outlined today?
Look, I think this is something consistent with what Speaker Oliva has said in the past and Speaker Corcoran. As our budget has grown, we have a higher dollar amount now in our state budget and our reserves than we've ever had. But our budget's bigger than it's ever been. So my point is, to answer your question, it's having our reserves keep pace with the size increases of our budget.
Well, is your goal going to be on a per capita basis? Speaker Oliva talked about per capita a lot last year, as opposed to the top line.
I think it's easy, man. It's just a question of how big, what's the percentage of the pie, right? If it's the same percentage of the pie, right, last year, then we've kept pace. But if it's a smaller percentage of our reserves, then we haven't kept pace. So my point to us now is that we haven't kept pace and that we should keep pace.
Do you want the top line of the budget to go down from a top line perspective, or at least the state pie that you have most control over?
Understand that it's success that has caused the budget to go up, right? It's people that are moving to Florida, that they're fleeing those high tax states to come here, which is why our revenue's bigger. And that's great. That's great news. But we should be saving as much as we were percentage-wise the year before, even though we have more people and more tax dollars.
Are you anticipating, as some of the economists might be doing, that we'll be entering a recession at some point in the near future?
If you all know the answer to that question, I know we'd all love to hear it. I know Amy Baker talked yesterday a lot about black swans, and we hear that every year. Look, it's certainly in one of those things that's in the back of all of our minds all the time, right? That it could happen at any moment. Which I think it's why it's more important to make sure that we're preparing in case it does happen, so that we're not taking it off guard, so that we are prepared for the next recession when that should come.
Can I ask you a question relative to the beginning of your speech, the top of your speech? You're talking about two worlds in D.C. and Tallahassee, and you're talking about people being filled with apocalyptic rage and being obsessed with what they do on Twitter. So then what is your thoughts about the president and his use of Twitter and the way that he engages with people?
I pegged you for that question, by the way, Gary. Here's what I would say. I don't like sometimes what the president tweets. It wouldn't be what I would tweet. I actually candidly think that it distracts from all the great things that he's doing. What I would say is, and it wasn't a message, it was a message about all of us, is that all of us are engaged in this social media world where people react quickly, they react loudly, it's apocalyptic, and it's not reality. My point to everyone was we should be grounded firmly in reality, focusing on real problems, not being worried about what the emotional moment is on Twitter.
There was a workshop yesterday in the Senate regarding the future of mass violence. Will you be open to discussing that issue and anything that the House or that the Senate may put forward?
Well, we're certainly interested to hear what the Senate has to say and what those discussions are. I think that you saw in the Marjory Stoneman Douglas bill that you had leaders at that time, Speaker Oliva and Senator Galvano worked together on Marjory Stoneman Douglas. We worked on that bill very, very hard. I think what we all want to know is, how is it working? What's happening? Are there problems? And if there's next steps, what are the next steps?
Data then for all that. It was apparently discussed in the Education Committee. I don't know if it's House or Senate, that they don't know how many teachers have that. I mean, are signed up for that and that sort of thing. I mean, do you need more data to get that information?
that going forward?
I don't know whether or not that data point in particular would be helpful. I think data points generally are usually helpful and informative in the context of conversation. So I think it's a question of being, listening to the testimony. To your point about data, one of the reasons we got to the Guardian program even again last year was because all of the data and all the testimony at the commission at Marjory, Stoneman, Douglas supported the idea that we do the Guardian program again, which is why we did it.
Going back to your comment about climate change, you mentioned not getting caught up in semantics. Do you think that the Republican Party nationally has gotten too caught up in being afraid of the words climate change, like you said?
I think both parties have gotten amped up about words, right? I mean, part of the problem when you talk about things like the environment is that it's been so hyper politicized by everyone that we're not having an actual conversation as to what do we need to do, what's a reasonable step, what's a practical way to mitigate things like risks of flooding in our coastal communities. So my point was to stop with the national nonsense of the conversation that's so toxic and focus on what are practical solutions.
Can you respond, follow up? There was some testimony before the Senate committee yesterday from law enforcement that said that they would like to see a more consistent policy as it relates to background checks. For example, eliminating the gun show loophole. That also is very popular even among Republicans, according to some Republican polling. How are you on that position? Is that something you're willing to discuss and take up as legislation on the floor of the House?
I think that you've seen us discuss hundreds of amendments on guns over the course of the session. So I don't think it's ever an issue of discussing the topics. I think the issue is what are the solutions that make sense for Floridians. And it's early in the session. We haven't even started. I don't even think a bill's been heard in committee. So we'll be listening and watching as to what takes place.
Now, I want to ask you regarding one of the things that's going to come. The bill will be due when you're speaker on those toll roads that you approved this past year, and it's an idea that emanates mostly from the Senate, but it's going to come on your watch ultimately. I'm wondering, are you foursquare in favor of those roads going forward, or are you going to take it one day at a time? Kind of thing?
I voted for it. I supported the plan, and I continue to support the plan.
Because it could be big money down the road.
Yeah, I continue to support the plan.
Okay.
Thank you all very much.
All right,
Appreciate
guys,
it.
we got to get to 3:30.
Thank you all very much.